Yo, what is up guys, your boy IzuKage here with a new what if, and this what if is what if Deku had Garous abilities. I've been wanting to do this for months now and it's finally here. Also, you all want to know when Merlin Magic Part 2 is coming, and honestly, I don't know. I went so far off canon I confused myself, but don't worry, I'm gonna get to that. And in other news, I have my final exam this Wednesday, so wish me luck on that, it's my most important one. But with that all out of the way, let's get right into the what if.
Talk to me nice, look, dirty, bird, big body Benz, I got you. Scope on the creek, get in like a Mac. Can't fuck with these hoes, these bitches is true. I'm married to bitches, got niggas attached.
Izuku in this, his story is quite similar to canon and his life has been unchanged. Izuku gets bullied for not having a quirk and even the doctors told him he would never have one. But Izuku's dad is still around, but not for long. So Izuku is at home and he's playing around with his All Might action figure, he has Edge Shot also and Endeavor. But when his dad comes home from work, Izuku, being 5 years old, he shouts out happy and goes and hugs Hiyashi, and Inko comes and kisses him on the cheek. He picks up Izuku and says, "You want to go to the park?" And Izuku starts shouting in excitement. So Hiyashi tells Inko they'll be out for a bit, and he puts Izuku in his car seat and they start driving to the park. They make it there, but it was a bad time to be there because Bakugo was there with some of his friends. And Hiyashi was working on something from work, so he wasn't paying attention. Izuku tried hiding under the slide, but Bakugo pulled him out by the back of his shirt and said, "Didn't I tell you to stay away from the park, Deku?" Izuku tried calming Bakugo down, saying he's gonna leave, he just forgot. And Bakugo chuckles and says, "Well, I'll jog your memory," and he pushes Deku to the ground. Izuku uses this time to run back to Hiyashi, and Bakugo, seeing Izuku's dad there, they were scared, like him and his group of friends, because they see him as some form of dragon because of all the cartoons they watch. So they run off while Izuku runs to Hiyashi and he says, "Dad, I think I'm ready to go." Hiyashi looks at his clock and says, "Are you sure? We only just got here." And Izuku nods his head. So on the way back home, they are stopped at an intersection when they get the green light to go, and Hiyashi does, but he didn't see the truck barreling down the street, unable to brake, and it slams right into Hiyashi's driver door. And this sends both cars airborne, glass covering the streets, and the car was stuck between the truck and a building it smashed into. So the smoke from both vehicles began filling the air and people were screaming in horror and dialed the police, while heroes nearby tried to do whatever they can. So the truck that collided with Hiyashi's car wasn't any old truck, it was going to a quirk research facility and it was carrying radioactive material. So after blocking off the area, heroes and first responders started cutting through the car because the accident flipped it on its side and blocked all the doors. So they used a saw to cut through the roof, and after half an hour, they pulled out Hiyashi and Izuku. So they took them both to the hospital where Hiyashi was announced dead and Izuku lost his right arm and right leg. Too great an injury for any healing quirk to aid him. So Inko was at home when she got a call, and on the other line were the doctors who told Inko about the tragedy. Inko froze and the doctors asked Miss Midori, "Are you still there?" But Inko couldn't believe what she was hearing. The phone fell from her hand and tears started rolling down Inko's face. Inko quickly grabbed a jacket and started running to the hospital since they had no car, and this took at least an hour to get there. Inko asked the receptionist about her son and they led her to the room where Izuku was still on life support. The tears started again and Inko sat by Izuku's side and held his hand. She was overcome with emotions like, how could this even happen? Izuku remained in the hospital where he would awaken, but no one was in the room since Inko was at Hiyashi's funeral that day. In his bed, Izuku stretched like he just woke up, and when he looked at his arm, it was weird because His right arm was a lighter shade than his left. But Izuku didn't really think much of it, but then all the memories of the car accident and the whole truck, just everything hit him, and he held his head in pain from the influx of information, and all Izuku could think of was his dad. He got up and out of his bed with the tubes still attached to him, and he's like dragging his IV drip behind him. Izuku got into the hallway, and the first doctor he saw, he grabbed onto his coat and said, "Where's my dad?" The doctor looked confused and called for security. Soon a bunch of people wearing vests were surrounding Izuku before his personal doctor came and injected him with a tranquilizing agent, putting him to sleep. Hours later, Izuku wakes up with his mom and doctor discussing something. They were talking about how it was possible that Izuku regrew his limbs. When they saw that he was awake, Inko came over and comforted Izuku, saying that everything was okay. After a week more in the hospital, Izuku was permitted to go home, but for the next year, he would go through physiotherapy to regain proper control of his body, like walking or even eating properly and using his right hand. So Izuku is 10 and he's been a shut-in ever since the incident. He hasn't been to school, he just stays home all day. Until Izuku came across a video of villains holding up a bank with hostages, and of course the heroes come in, they save the day, and Izuku had seen how corrupt heroes can be. After they rescue the hostages, they took interview after interview, capitalizing off innocent people, and Izuku wanted a change. Only two heroes stood out to him, All Might and Eraserhead. All Might did take interviews sometimes, but little was known about him or his quirk. That's why he admired him so much. He jumped in, saved the day, maybe tells everyone to be safe, and leaves. And Eraserhead is even better, some people don't even know he exists. So Izuku decided to do something with his life and left his room. He was sickly skinny, like I'm talking bone and skin, that's it. And he was pretty tall for his age, so he asked Inko if he could get training at a local dojo, and he had already picked it out. Inko was surprised at how much Izuku was interested, and if it meant him getting out of the house, she would take it. So she signed him up to the dojo, and the owner was this old guy and he had two pupils, Charanko and Ojiro. Izuku bowed to his new sensei Shifu. Yes, like Kung Fu Panda, I just like the name, okay? So Master Shifu wanted to test Izuku. He expected him to be pretty weak, the kid is basically just sticks, and so he went full speed, dashing behind Izuku and threw a punch at him. Izuku's body moved on its own and it went to cover the back of his head where the punch was going to land. But of course, Master Shifu stops before he actually hits him, and he was actually impressed at the kid's reflexes and said, "Good job, I will accept you into my class." Izuku didn't know what he did, but hey, he was accepted. So 2 years go by and Izuku has improved tremendously, becoming Shifu's best student. Izuku learned all of Shifu's martial arts technique just a week into his training, and he has a sort of natural ability to learn new things and make his opponent's fighting styles his own. So Izuku had been back to school and everyone could feel something ominous about him. He became more lean and taller than everyone else in his class. So Izuku is 12 and he's been training and wants to go all out in training today. He enters the dojo and Charanko and Ojiro are doing their usual routine, and Izuku walks up to both of them and says to Ojiro, "Fight me." He's in the middle of his stretches and says, "Bro, we can spar later." But Izuku wasn't satisfied with the answer, and he swipes Ojiro's legs, knocking him off balance and falling to the ground. Ojiro though uses his tail to catch himself and he says, "What's your problem, dude?" And Izuku got into his martial arts stance and said, "Fight me." Ojiro said, "Well, you asked for it," and he swung his tail at Izuku, but he grabbed it and threw him across the dojo. Ojiro landed and dashed at Izuku, and the two started trading blows, but it was obvious Izuku had the upper hand. He put his leg in between Ojiro's and grabbed one of his punches, spun around, flipped Ojiro over his shoulder and slammed him onto the ground. Shifu, who lived below the dojo, ran upstairs hearing the commotion, and he came through the door and saw Izuku punch Ojiro in the chest, sending him flying and into the wall, and he wasn't getting up. Sharanko was in the corner scared, and as Izuku was walking towards him, Shifu steps in and says, "Why are you doing this?" Izuku says, "I'm only testing my power," and he ran past Shifu and was about to strike Sharanko when Shifu grabbed him and pushed him back. Izuku was angry and said, "So you want some then?" and he rushed Shifu. He was overpowering Izuku with ease, but Izuku smirked and he said, "I knew you were hiding more from me," and he quickly adapted to Shifu's fighting style, using it against him and pushed him back. Shifu had no choice and used his quirk. For a second, Shifu's strength would increase immensely. The reason why he didn't become a hero with it is because of the requirement for his quirk to be really effective. The longer he doesn't use the quirk is the stronger it gets. And he can only activate the strength once a day for a few seconds, as I mentioned. And he hasn't used his quirk for years. So Shifu activated his quirk and his muscles tensed up and his veins started bulging. He disappeared from Izuku's vision, appearing behind him, and in one move struck all his weak points. Izuku's body tensed up, and for a second he couldn't feel anything, but the effects didn't last long. And when Shifu saw this, his eyes widened. How? Most people would drop just on the spot whenever he used that. So using the little time he had left, he punched Izuku max power in his chest. And this punch was like Detroit Smash but stronger, sending Izuku flying through the walls of the dojo and falling down the mountain which the building was built in the side of. So Izuku woke up hours later in a shallow river and he shook his head and he thought, who knew the old man had such a strong quirk? And he groaned as he got up, and Izuku limped his way back home, and luckily Inko was out, so he got in, showered and had some rest. Fast forward a year, and at school Izuku made it clear he isn't someone to mess with, taking down anyone who even looks at him wrong. Even older students, Izuku doesn't discriminate, he doesn't care about your age. But Izuku had never gotten in trouble because he knows how to keep him silent. So Izuku would spend his time learning all he can from the people around him. So we skip to the final day of school, and as Izuku is walking into school, people are making sure to step out of his way, and as he's about to enter class, he calls out Bakugo's name. Bakugo, who was trying to stay hidden, comes out and says, "Yes, Izuku?" Izuku said, "What school did you apply for?" And Bakugo said proudly, "UA." Izuku wasn't at all surprised and says, "Well, I'm applying there too. Make yourself useful and give the principal this letter." Bakugo couldn't stand being talked down to, but he complied and took it to the principal. Later that day, the teacher walks in and throws up the papers, and you know the routine, he's like, "I would pass out these papers, but I know you all want to be heroes." Everyone didn't react much, and the teacher really thought they would be more excited, but cleared his throat and continued. I see here we have two people who want to go to UA, Bakugo and Izuku. Still no reaction from the class, and the teacher just went along with the rest of his speech. And by the end of class, he just says, "I wish everyone good luck on their journey to the top." So school is out, and while Izuku is walking home, his reflexes kick in and dodges the sludge villain that tries attacking him. The sludge villain was taken aback and said, "What? Where did he go?" And Izuku was just standing right behind him and said, "You mean me?" The sludge villain quickly turned around, confused, then rushed Izuku. But he saw its weakness, its eyes. Izuku dashed towards the villain and stabbed his fingers into his eyes, causing the villain to become blind. The sludge villain roamed around clueless about where he was, and just went into a main street where All Might saw him and landed. He threw a Detroit Smash and took the sludge villain down and continued to put it in a bottle, Izuku stayed hidden but watched All Might, and seeing him in person, it was pretty underwhelming. All Might really has no skill, he's just strong. Still, Izuku had respect for All Might because he just captured the villain and left. And Izuku thought how he would fare against All Might in a fight. But he knew he would be beaten, like, come on, it's All Might. He's the #1 hero for a reason. So fast forward to when he gets home and Izuku says, he greets his mom and goes to his room to start planning out his training regimen for the 10-month training period. Izuku would try tapping into this strength he knew he has but rarely comes out because Izuku is quirkless, don't get it twisted, but from the radioactive material from the start of the whole series is where Izuku is starting to display some unusual abilities like incredible strength, speed, and his growth rate in battle. So Izuku begins to work on his body even more, but his room was starting to get a bit cramped, so he searched up for a place where he could be alone and train. And at the top result was a beach nearby called Dagobah Beach. It was abandoned due to people dumping their trash on the beach, but that could be used for training. You see, Izuku didn't care to help by picking up trash. Once it benefited him, he was on board. So the next day, Izuku went to the beach and like the image, it was filled with garbage. But what he didn't expect to see were people. 2 people seemed to have the same idea as he did, and when he got closer, he saw that it was a tall, scrawny guy and another guy who looked younger and more fit. So Mirio saw Izuku walking up to them and told All Might, and the two started, going to him and said, "Do you need something?" And Izuku said no, he was here to train just like they were, and Mirio was excited and said, "Well, we could train together, why not?" All Might was hesitant but agreed also, and Izuku didn't have a problem with it. And while training with them is when his true colors started to show. He became more ruthless and went overboard sometimes. For instance, while sparring, Mirio faced through Izuku's punch and punched him in the face, and this made him mad. Swiftly, Izuku turned around and backhanded Mirio in the face with a closed fist when he became tangible. Izuku then jumped high into the air, and when he came down with a powerful punch, Mirio became intangible and Izuku punched the ground, creating a small crater. This worried All Might, like, why was this kid taking it so far? But the fight ended with All Might stopping it soon after. So during the rest of the 10-month, Izuku worked harder than he ever did, like running full speed in water until the drag didn't affect him anymore. Izuku would just jump out of a plane without a parachute, and he would intentionally try to drown himself to see its effect on him. Izuku would just go places that no normal person would dare do, but that's what it takes to be the best. So Izuku also analyzed different heroes' fighting styles, if they were unique enough like Gran Torino, because how Gran Torino fights isn't like every hero that just punches through walls. So during this time, Bakugo also put in some work. He hated how he had to be some sort of servant to Izuku, but that's going to quickly change. So the day before the entrance exams, Izuku and Mirio decide to have a friendly spar, friendly in quotation marks. They stood across from each other and All Might said, "Fight." They went hard from the start, with Izuku hitting Mirio when he least expected it, and Mirio phasing through some of Izuku's punches. All Might was amazed at Izuku's rapid progress and thought about giving one for all to him. He seemed more capable than Mirio, to be honest, but Izuku didn't have the hero virtues he was looking for. So the fight continued, and Izuku decided the only way to beat Mirio was to outspeed him. So Izuku began dashing around randomly, like being unable to track, and Mirio would get punched and he would try turning around, figuring where it came from, but he just couldn't. And All Might the entire time was stunned. These movements were similar to his old master, Gran Torino. So Izuku came from behind Mirio and kicked him in the back so hard he flew into the water, and All Might was just amazed, like what is this kid even? But his train of thought was broken when Izuku said, he's gonna get ready for his exams tomorrow, and All Might was like, oh yeah, sure, and watches Izuku walk off. The next day rolls around and Izuku is ready to get into UA so he could have a chance to fight stronger people. Izuku walked up to the gate and saw a familiar face, Ojiro. He walked up to him and said, oh, hey Ojiro. Ojiro heard the voice and chill filled his body. Ojiro turned around and said, Izuku, what are you doing here? You're no hero. And Izuku chuckled and said, I never said I was. I could care less about saving people. I just want to fight. Ojiro froze hearing this and he didn't even realize Izuku had already left. So Izuku walked into the UA and there he signed up and got seated at the written portion of the exams. There he didn't do incredible, but not worse than canon. He did about the same. And then he moved on to the lecture hall where President Might began speaking about the robots. There he was seated next to Bakugo, who was fearful of Izuku because of his previous experiences with him, but he was trying to remain straight-faced. Izuku didn't even acknowledge his existence and kept on listening to President Mike as Ida also got embarrassed because he tried saying he wasn't going to talk about the zero pointer. So everyone gets assigned to their mock city and Izuku is assigned to mock city B. In there he sees a few people from earlier outside like the brunette and Ida and some other faces. So after a bit of waiting, President Mike comes over the intercom and says, there are no countdowns in a fight, go go go. Izuku took a deep breath and said, let's see what UA has in store. But that is where I'm going to be leaving this one off. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end of the video. If you liked it, like, and if you like my content in general, consider subscribing, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next What If.